Welcome to Share Speech.
See where the Spirit takes us.
All right, what's going on, everyone? My name is Kenneth Scher, author of Behaving As Us, and I'm here with Father Chuck. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good day, everyone, and good to be here with you, Kenny. I'm Father Chuck Durante. I'm rector at St. Thomas Aquinas Cathedral here in downtown Reno. This is a parish close to my heart. I grew up in this parish, grew up in Reno, and I was assigned here after various other assignments in the diocese over these last almost 9 years, and just came back here in 2018 as pastor. So it's kind of a full circle. I feel like I've come.
There we go. Well, I guess that will get into the first idea, just to give the viewers an understanding of who you are. Why did you want to become a priest? You know, you were in the parish your whole life here, but what was the factors contributing to that?
Well, so I grew up basically in this parish from my early childhood through college.
Okay.
And I got to know the priests very well and the community very well. And various experiences over time kind of started me thinking about priesthood. But I also was thinking about marriage and family, and so that was something that was very much a part of my life and my culture. Being in Italian, that's an important part of that family tradition, and so forth.
I guess so. How's that playing out with the family, that you can't have kids or be married?
Right. I mean, that was a big thing I had to discern, right, and to truly enter into a dialogue with God, saying, okay, if this is what you're calling me to as a priest, help me reach peace in mind and heart with that part of this decision.
Yeah.
And so that took some time to get there. I dated a girl all through college and was very serious about that relationship. We talked some about marriage and so on. We both were going to go to law school.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And then before that happened, she kind of had a different awakening, a different call. So I went to law school on my own, and that's when I started really discerning priesthood.
Okay, because you're like, the legal stuff wasn't really what you thought it was going to be?
No, it wasn't that, actually. I enjoyed the law. I think it was the first time I was living on my own and was living in a strange place. We had no law schools in Nevada in those days, and so it made me rethink and think deeper and go deeper. And so through that time, I started discerning more and more. But finished law school, came back here, practiced law.
Okay.
Yeah, for a few years.
Before you became a priest?
Yep.
Yeah.
Before I went to seminary.
That's cool.
So it was sort of one of those. I said, okay, I'm going to... I had to pay off my school loans for one, so
that doesn't go away if you become a priest.
It doesn't. No. So I dealt with that and continued to pray and reflect, and finally I said, okay, God, I'm going to try this for a year of seminary and see what happens. And
okay, so that's an interesting thing. How does the process of becoming a priest work? You're saying seminary? That's what it's called?
Yeah.
So what's day one to finishing day? It's not like a graduation ceremony, but like what's...
Well, no, it would be, the equivalent would be ordination, right? So, but it's a process, in those days it was a 5-year process of school, so that was a big decision for me. I'd already been through a lot of school, but it's a process of first studying some philosophy, and then, because that's a foundation for a lot of our theology, and then studying various levels of theology and scripture and pastoral ministry and so forth.
That gets really interesting, because I'm assuming a lot of the teachings will be just specifically about Christianity, But I also assume there'd be kind of a bigger class about other religions, other theologies, other philosophies. And
Yeah, at some level. I mean, there were optional classes that you could take that weren't required that I always found interesting. I think our religions of the world, the major religions of the world, intersect.
Yeah,
and
how those big three, or even Eastern religions.
Right, even Eastern religions, having some concept of that stuff, I think is helpful in understanding my own religion as well, by way of contrast and comparison and so forth, right? So your 2 years of studies, graduate studies, then you take a year, we call it the pastoral year, and you're working a parish for that whole year. So it's like an intern year, and it really gives a guy a chance to say, am I cut out for this? Do I really want to do this? And then we go back for 2 more years of study.
Okay. And so in this practicum kind of year, are you doing any sermons? Are you doing any preaching? Or is it almost just like volunteer work for the parish, like landscaping and yard work?
No, it's working in a parish, doing some pastoral counseling, depending, but and doing some level of preaching. Technically, you have to be ordained in our tradition to preach, so it's sort of an accommodation for a seminarian, but it's an important one because we would then have people sitting out in the pews who would take some notes and thoughts and give us feedback, which was very helpful and important.
Okay, so this process takes 5 years. It's almost like getting your doctorate, but you're basically a doctorate in Christianity.
Sort of. What we get is a master's. It's called a Master's of Divinity. It's the longest master's there is, and probably. But it's more, Master of Divinity is sort of a professional degree versus, like a JD is for law school, versus an academic degree. And so it works that way. But you're in school long enough to have gotten a doctorate, that's for sure.
Okay, damn. So this is good understanding, and we're hearing a lot about your praying. And I just wanted to think of, you're faced with these hard tasks, right? Very hard choices to make. You have to choose one, which, I mean, in essence, both choices, you'll receive some kind of reinforcement, for speaking technically. But giving up one of the choices also comes with that feeling of you're losing something, which I guess where I might see prayer helping regulate emotions. Because it could be a very hard thing if you're just too emotionally bound to both options. If both are just too weigh heavily on you. So I guess that could be a first idea. How does prayer, do you think, how might it help with being able to calm yourself, regulate emotions, whether it's fear, sadness, hate? I guess that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I mean, I think prayer, first and foremost, is, I think, crucial because it helps us recognize that there is a being bigger and more important than I am. You know, the old saying, there is a God and I'm not it. So I think prayer helps in a role of perspective and seeing there's so much more than what I can see, right? So I think that's one. And then two, it is certainly a sense of centering also. So, you know, a sense, certainly prayer is meditative, especially if we understand prayer, which I think is true, as being a form of dialogue. It isn't just me talking to God, right? Which is a danger for us as Catholics. You know, we learn our prayers, right? And so we just say our prayers, right? Very important, part of our tradition. But we also have to remember the other very important part of our tradition, which is listening.
And see, this breaks down into some amazing things because I've hypothesized, I haven't done too much research on it, but I believe one of the ideas why prayer and other things of, you know, talking internally to yourself, to a higher power, how that might have been selected is it practices language. It helps us condition this part of our brain that can help us, like we say, regulate emotion. This newer part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex. And I love what you said about perspective taking almost. It helps give you another perspective, which is precisely what I talk about in my book, to how we can play on neurochemistry to calm ourselves. So just say something very scientific. If we have activation in our medial prefrontal cortex, that activation, it inhibits activation in our dorsal raphe nucleus, which is some area in our brain that sends serotonin, 5-HT cells, to our amygdala, which gets us anxious, and also to the, dorsal preaqueductal gray, which inhibits exploratory behavior. So basically what I'm saying is, when you take perspective through prayer, through however it is, you're playing a trick on yourself to where you're making it almost impossible to be fearful. And so this is why it's really cool. You take two guys in a jungle situation, one who prays to God, whether or not God exists actually, because he believes and he's praying towards it, he is able to practice emotional regulatory ability and actually do the fearful thing that others might not want to do, that others are too scared to do. And so that's incredible to me. So I don't know, when I hear this, what are you picking up when I'm putting that?
Well, I think one thing that's crucial would be the difference between a believer who is praying and another who's just practicing it for purposes of, internal control or whatever.
Yeah, okay.
Right? And I think that the difference is that as a believer, I have a sense of relationship. What was calling me to priesthood, right, was bigger than me. And it wasn't just, well, that looks interesting, I think I could do that.
Yeah.
Which was more what the law was like for me. It's like, it was interesting. I thought I could help people, and but this was a tug on my heart. So it was more, and when I entered into prayer then, it was more than just me reflecting or even just getting a different perspective, but me having a relationship with a higher power. So it seems to me that it would have a different effect internally as well.
No, I mean, that really does make sense, because I'm thinking of almost as someone who truly believes they're praying to the higher power versus someone who's, what is it, I'm trying to think of a funny term, like someone who only prays some of the time when they really want something and they don't actually believe, but that difference, absolutely. I can see that there, because it's all about the perception. If you don't actually believe the thing, then there's no real, like you said, connection. That context isn't there for that real hope or that real,
I think it could leave a void. You know, like an agnostic who's like, well, I really don't know, is going to have a very different experience. Not ever putting parameters of how God may be able to act in that person's life anyway. So that's a piece of it. God doesn't just exist because I believe God exists, right? And so,
And that's, I guess that's the whole part of it, is the person who isn't doing it, because there's this idea of praying to him makes him exist, but that's not the idea. The idea is he is there, so you pray. No, it's that weird nuance of the if-then almost, in a sense. It's
sure.
Okay, that's really cool. All right. So a personal note, you said prayer was able to help you make a decision at law school. How has other times prayer helped you, or even other people? How have you seen prayer help people and help change their lives?
Oh, wow. So it's certainly a big question, because it affects people in so many different ways. So I always like to say prayer isn't about changing God's mind, right? So it isn't, well, if I pray long and hard enough, God will make something different.
Oh my gosh.
That prayer is more about relationship. Certainly petition. Petition is an ancient part of prayer in pretty much all the major religions, right? In that sense of understanding that as we come to know God and how God responds to prayer, that it can be effective. So I've had people say, I was praying for my mother or my son or somebody who was very sick, and they got better.
Yeah.
Right? And I've had people say, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and she still died. So that's why it isn't, prayer isn't effectual in getting what I want.
Yes.
It's deeper than that. It's more than that. It has to be relational.
And I love that you say this, because I also do reaction videos to comedians. And one of the biggest ones is George Carlin. And I don't know if you know who he is.
Yep.
And he has a very funny bit about when people pray to have something, like you said, to change something or have it their way. And he has this funny bit of, well, God wrote this divine plan. Don't you think that's coming in, interfering with his divine plan? You get what you want. But that funny bit relating to what you're saying, it is interesting where, I guess, can we go into the nuance of actually petitioning? Because prayer isn't just about trying to get what you want. It's almost even helping accept what will happen regardless of what it is, in a sense, too. Or yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's prayer. So in the context of a believer, prayer presumes that there is a God. Prayer presumes that God is listening. And prayer presumes, certainly in the Christian tradition, I would say in many, that I'm not in control and I have to surrender. I have to surrender this prayer and trust that God knows better than I know, and to some degree this divine plan thing. Not that we're predestined,
exactly.
right? But this sense of being in the context of what God creates, and letting that go then. And that prayer, much like someone who's burdened, right? And they meet and talk with somebody. Nothing's changed, but at the end of that time talking, they feel less burdened.
Yes.
That's what I mean by relational.
Absolutely. And this makes me think of relational frame theory, which I don't know if you know
I'm
or
not
who
familiar
anyone
with that
doesn't.
term.
So relational frame theory is a new theory of human language and cognition created by one of the professors at UNR. His name's Dr. Stephen Hayes. And him and his colleagues, and now for the last 20 years, tons of people have been able to apply it to something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the biggest parts of it, the acceptance part, takes from a lot of Eastern religion ideas of meditation and mindfulness, which, as we're talking about, is really similar to prayer in a sense, for this idea of acceptance. Now, whether it's good or bad, you're in a really situation, your mom dies, that acceptance part of everything, that's beautiful.
And if we can't accept it, then we get stuck, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that can be very destructive, self-destructive, as well.
And that makes me even think about if there's no hope, right? Like with learned helplessness studies, if you're in this horrible condition, it's weird accepting that you're in a horrible condition, but the other side of acceptance and commitment theory, committing, realizing, believing that you actually can change it, that there's hope, which in some situations there is objective hopelessness. You really can't change it. But I'd say in most situations that's perceived hopelessness. So having this ability to accept where you're at, but still, I guess in a way, believe that you can do so. Is there something in prayer with, though not wanting to wanting God to give you something, or wanting something, this perceptual desire for your life to play out, but I guess wanting the strength to continue in a way, because I feel like I hear that a lot in prayer. Give me the strength to continue. What's setting that off?
Absolutely. So I think faith, as the letter to Hebrews would put it, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but faith is a realization of things hoped for. So it's that sense of saying, this is a reality, and the hope that I have is sustaining me because of my faith. So I would say to everyone who listens that hope and faith go together. So in order to sustain hope, it's different than a wish, right? It's saying, no, I believe in this truth, and therefore it sustains me in hope.
And this, stepping a little bit away from religion, but into an idea maybe of just, you want to be successful in your life. Either you want to be great at your job, being a great mother. This idea of absolutely knowing this hope, not just, as you said, not just wanting, not just wishing, but absolute certainty that you know this truth that you can do something, maybe, that you can do something. This is a huge point of why you never say, I can't do something, I can't succeed. As soon as you do that, you shut off your, motivation to explore. And this is where we see people get trapped and learn helplessness. If we don't have, in this case, a complete conviction of, like we're saying, if we don't have complete conviction that we will be able to do something, or that at the end of the day, God has our back, or something. If we don't have that, whether it be a religious thing, whether it's anything, if we don't have anything to ground ourselves to be hopeful, to have any further motivation to explore, we're done for. And so I guess, how does this work? How does this relate with people who are new to Christianity and new to faith? Is there somewhat of convincing that takes place going down to try to, how is getting a new believer? How does that usually happen, a new believer?
Well, I think typically the new believers have a greater passion and a connection than those who grew up in it. Because it can feel like, and actually be for many people, cultural. It's just, well, I grew up in this, was my family, and it's just what we always did. Right? Yeah. As opposed to...
It's just habit.
Exactly. To an adult who's coming... So we have the process in the church called the RCIA, which stands for the Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults. Yeah. So it's a process of about a year where people come to... And this is... Something has moved them, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's someone they're in relationship with. Maybe it's just a deeper sense, like this tug on my heart I talked about. And they want to learn more. Mm-hmm. So they start coming. And so we're doing teaching. Well, what is it? So we talk about scriptures and we do those things. But it's also about developing this relationship with God. And so at Easter every year, Easter time, so just last Saturday ago, those who were on that journey who had not been baptized were baptized. Those who were baptized maybe in another Christian denomination or Catholic but never continued their formation, then they receive the other sacraments. So they tend to be on fire more. They're excited. They're like, wow, this is new, it sometimes teaches those. When I say someone's been in relationship and their husband is Catholic and now they're becoming a Catholic. Well, they often end up being a better Catholic than the husband because they're excited about it and they learned about it as an adult as opposed to growing up with it.
And it makes a lot of sense because I'm referring to learned helplessness a lot, but just because I read some studies recently. But one of the ideas is, I talked about, if we can activate our medial prefrontal cortex, we can have all this other chain reaction stuff go down to help regulate our emotions. But the idea is this, this activation in our brain, is this some kind of habit behavior, or is this goal-directed behavior? Is this some new exploratory behavior, or is this just you're always cutting the loop? And it's interesting to think that people who have grown up in it, who are just habit-based, it could be something interesting where, because the parts of their brain that are activated during their worship, in a sense, or their, practice and prayer, it's so much habit-driven and not necessarily goal or exploratory-driven that someone who might be a lifelong believer just from birth could be less prepared in an objectively hopeless situation versus someone who's new to the faith, who's learning how to deal with the struggles of their life and learning new behaviors through their goal-directed circuit. Having that different, and we're saying in a way basically context, and how the faith is learned can probably have different results on how hope is perceived and how people can take these lessons and apply it to their life. I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think generally that's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Damn. All right. Well, another thing I really want to talk about. What are some teachings of Jesus, quotes, verses, even just stories, that talk about loving people, forgiving those, trying to be understanding? Because in my book, Behaving as Us, one of the hardest things to do is forgive someone. Right? It's incredibly challenging to forgive because you've been wronged, right? But there's an idea of if we can take someone's perspective, understand why someone's doing something, maybe in their mind it wasn't wrong, it was right. That can kind of help us form a new context, a new relationship, and help us talk with them, sit with them, empathize with them. So I guess what are some teachings of Jesus that talk about empathy, love, forgiveness, understanding that everyone should hear because they're great lessons, but that even Christians might just forget that we need to be reminded of?
Well,
there's a lot. I don't know.
There's a lot.
Pick up the Bible, but
So forgiveness is absolutely central to Christianity. And I always, in working with people sometimes who are having a hard time forgiving, I often will say, first, keep in mind that to forgive someone doesn't mean what happened was okay. It doesn't mean that it was right. No, it's acknowledging that I was hurt, and it's a little bit of that acceptance we were talking about earlier, but it's lifting that up, and I put it in this term. I always say, I am for giving it to God. That I'm not going to hold on to this anymore. Now, oftentimes stepping in the shoes of the other, I think, is very important, because sometimes you can say, I understand that person didn't intend to hurt me. But people who are stuck often enough, they are on the receiving end of someone who intended to hurt them.
Sure. Yeah.
And probably the most powerful symbol for us as Christians is the cross, and the prayer or the statement, prayer that Jesus makes to the Father when he's on the cross, saying, Father, forgive them. And there's an added piece there, is that for they know not what they do. Now that, on the one hand, gets to, maybe they didn't intend to hurt me kind of thing, right, for some people. But that doesn't work here, because clearly they intended to nail him to the cross. So it's a bigger sense, probably, in that prayer of they don't know they're crucifying the Lord. And that, so that there's another way to interpret that. But I just mentioned that as an aside, because it really is, the cross is really for us the primary example of forgiveness.
Which is beautiful, and I love that you said it's not saying what they did was okay or even good.
Absolutely.
And this is something I try to clarify in my book. It's, if we just want to forgive everyone, and I try to make it in context of, if we understand why someone can do something, if we really are curious to understand why they think what they do, why they believe what they do, that perspective taking can come into play. But if someone commits a crime, rape, murder, this idea of forgiveness, trying to understand with them, trying to empathize, but having that cultural consequence of either a prison sentence, rehabilitation, whatever the culture deems necessary as some kind of punishing consequence, right? Punishment in the sense of a behavior analytic person who is just wants to reduce that terrible illegal behavior. But then there is some weird middle ground of punishing for the sake of just almost being mean, mean back to someone. And so we're talking in Christianity, is there this idea of retribution. Because I know in the first, almost a chapter, in the first half in the Jewish Bible, Torah, eye for an eye, right? Retribution. And even in Islam, retribution. Are there aspects of retribution in Christianity, and we want to forgive, but is there still some, if this happens, the correct way to, I guess, handle a criminal would be to do this? Is there any kind of, I guess, framework for that? Or?
Well, yes and no. And I think a couple of things. I'm not as familiar with the Quran, but of course the Christian scriptures include the Jewish scriptures, and which we call the Bible. And there is profound sense of forgiveness over and over in what we call the Old Testament, or the Torah to some degree, but there's our scriptures are slightly different and so on. But in the stories of Genesis and Exodus and Isaiah and Hosea, and so many of those books have a forgiving and loving God who continually renews the covenant over and over. And so there are something, interestingly, the eye for an eye. I remember having a conversation with a rabbi who said, that's not about retribution, that's about limitation. Because if there was a tribe and somebody got attacked and they killed somebody, then the inclination was go and kill 10 of theirs because of retribution. And what this eye for an eye is saying is, no, this is about maintaining equality here, right? So it wasn't about retribution per se, but clearly there is language of retribution, and I think in the Christian scriptures it would be much, it would be limited, and it would be in the sense that belongs to God. Whatever, if there's a punishment to be had, it is in God's hands to do that. For purposes of punishment only, as opposed to reform or protection of society or those other things. And but even the Old Testament, the phrase, right, vengeance belongs to God, right? That's something out of what we would call the Old Testament, right? So there's limitations there.
Yeah, because it's interesting. It's basically saying, you've been wronged. Don't go back and take that hate and push it back out in the world. Sit with it, pray with it almost for a second, really accept it, and then have this 100% conviction. We know they're in a way going to be dealt with in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, that's why that sense of giving it, giving it to God. I don't know if you remember years ago, there was that terrible shooting in the Amish country, and
must not have made the news.
It was a little joke. It might even be a little before you were paying attention to the news. Probably this was quite a few years back. But the powerful witness that Amish, of course, they're Christian, that they gave was the shooter, and I forget how many were killed. I want to say 10 or 12 or something. And then either was shot or he took his own life. The parents of the Amish children who were killed went to the funeral and to the parents of the one who was doing the shooting. Yeah. And they actually outnumbered the people who were there for and it was this sense of, we don't hold on to something even that wrong. Which again, they didn't do it to say it was okay, or it was, they were doing it to say, we know, and one of the people that was interviewed talked about this, that those parents are suffering like we're suffering, and we want to be there.
And that makes me even think how this idea of forgiveness, like we said, if one tribe hits one, you want to go hit 10. And I'm even thinking now, gang violence in these cities. Forgiveness, letting it drop. It's the only way to stop a cycle of violence. It's the only way to stop is someone has to say, I forgive you. Like if I know you wronged us, and this makes me think of, I mean, we just talked about the mass shooting, but every killer who, if there's to a Christian family and the dad or the mom forgives the killer in the court, like it's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
They're not saying, let him go free, let him roam around, but it's that weight off of your shoulders to no longer be producing hate and be controlled by this emotion.
Absolutely. You can't fight hate with hate. We've seen that over and over, and it has to be fought with love.
Because I guess this gets to the idea of war, using war to bring about peace.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, can't do that. You need peace and love to bring about peace. Because there's always the idea of, well, whoever got authoritatively taken over still is going to be begrudging unless you do some major mind control and propaganda and just...
Well, or you do reconciliation. So what Archbishop Tutu did in South Africa, right, in heading up the peace and reconciliation, those were powerful because the people had to come out and speak the truth. So they came and told their stories of what happened, and those who were the perpetrators had to sit and listen and to hear it and had to own it themselves. And they also had to say, I'm sorry. And there were amazing transformations that happened as a result of that very thing. It was looking the evil in the face, not the human being. I'm not calling a human being evil, but the actions, looking the actions in the face, owning my part, forgiving my part, and things changed. Now, we still have a lot of ramifications of apartheid and a lot of hatred and all that. So didn't heal it all, but it was a start. It was a powerful, powerful witness.
Man, it's staring the hate in the eye, and I love the note you made. It's not the person, it's the behavior, which is precisely the note I make in my book. It's not the person who is the evil incarnate of the Democrats or the Republicans. It's behavior, right? And the idea of looking at the hate, and this is why it's all about emotional regulatory skills. Being in contact with this aversive stimulus, this Tutu member who just killed your brother, your mother, your son. Looking at that evil, that aversiveness, having the courage to sit there and not lash out. This is some powerful stuff.
Oh.
This is powerful. Man.
Yeah.
Do you have any verses or any quotes off the top of your head about forgiveness? I know when Jesus was on the cross being crucified, but I guess any more really cool ones just about...
Well, yeah. So in each of the three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke for sure, I can't remember if this is in John, but the disciples, so these are the ones who are following Jesus and hearing him, that and in Matthew's version, I think it's Peter who actually says, how many times must I forgive my brother? As much as 7 times? Of course, 7 in the scriptures is a magical, not magical, is a perfect number, right? So, and Jesus answers, I don't say 7 times, I say 77 times. So in essence, forever and always. So 7 is an eternal number anyway, but Jesus, like, if you can go more than eternity, it's even more than that.
Yeah,
right?
damn.
That's what we're called to always forgive. And that's probably the most in-your-face teaching on forgiveness. It has no conditions.
No condition. This gets into a therapy technique, I think by Carl Rogers, unconditional positive regard. I mean, it's hard to do this with a stranger because there's trust issues. There's don't go into a stranger's van. Don't play with strangers, stuff like that. But still, having this almost intrinsic love, forgiveness, kind, caring for everyone, almost everything, even too. It's man. All right.
Yeah, it's not our, and it's not it seems like it's not in the human condition, right? And that innately we want to strike back or whatever. And this is, we say, well, yes, Jesus could forgive unconditionally. And our hope is, as Christians, that we can follow his way, but we're going to not reach that time and again. But there are many who do reach it, at least for a part of their life or a moment even in their life.
This makes me even think of loving kindness meditation in Buddhism, where you start with something super easy to shower love and kindness onto, a dog, your mom, people that you really actually do love, and gradually work step by step to someone who you just cannot stand. But the idea is that's always required, and this makes me think, and I want to know your opinion, how much of the scriptures, and to me it's basically the whole thing, but how to live your life, not just to be a good person, but to, I guess we'll just sum it up with, to be a good person, to be happy, to be loving, to be committed to something, to producing something. How does the teachings work with, because they're teachings of what to do, how to behave. So is that basically the whole book or the whole Bible, what to do in a way?
Well,
or like tricks.
It does have an element of how to live, right?
Okay.
So, say the book of Proverbs, right, in the Old Testament is filled with all kinds of things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some wonderful, wise things, and so it clearly is somewhat about how to live. But what we would say is that the Bible is a book of faith about the relationship between God and his people.
Interesting.
Right? And so that relationship unfolds, that includes our relationship with one another, that we can't, St. James says in his letter, you can't say I love God and hate my neighbor. It's an incongruence that it's one. In Matthew 25, Jesus says, in telling a story, he says, what you do to one of these least ones of mine, you do to me. What you don't do, you don't do to me. So it's this sense of we are that connected. And therefore, yes, our behaviors are defined and advised, if you will, through the scriptures.
Yes. This makes me think about the idea of God, and I've heard this. It's in me, it's in you, it's everyone. It is everything. God is the totality of existence, and then some, in a way. And so to hate your neighbor is to hate God, because your neighbor, it's not like your neighbor is God, but God is, in some way, your neighbor. I know I'm just saying those in reverse, but it's like the context how I'm seeing it. But does it sound...
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sense of that God is in all things that God has created,
which is everything.
Which is everything, and so there's that sense of there isn't a place I can say yes, but not this one, or yes, but not that. Right? It's somehow inclusive and more, right? That what we see in creation is one author likes to use the term room with a view, right? A room with a view to God, or an understanding of God as part of God. But also God is more than what is created.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, this gets into interesting stuff, because I've heard some scientists, and science is stereotyped to be completely atheist, remove God from the equation. But there have been some very beautiful Christians and other just religious scientists who have argued, well, actually, this idea of the laws of nature makes me think, well, God is the laws of nature in a sense. He is the thing, or I don't know if I'm saying this right, that created the nothing from nothing, or the something from nothing. But then some people say, well, maybe we're just from another universe.
No, exactly. And I think I've talked with a number of scientists over the years who who say their faith is strengthened because of their knowledge of science.
And what is it? It's the idea that the universal structures for life are so completely, basically impossible, yet they are so fine. It's the fine-tuning argument, right? That idea.
Absolutely. I mean, it can't be accidental.
Right. That's it. Yeah.
That's what many of those I've talked to who really have spent their lives in science and so forth have said it's too wonderful to be accidental.
And the only thing I can think of trying to apply evolution and selection on a just universal scale is if we take maybe the idea that the Big Bang was from a black hole expanding in a different universe or something of that nature, that each new universe is trying to select the ways of life. But I'm like, I don't know. To me, what's most probable thing? Yeah, I mean, the scientists think it's, most probable thing. I mean, because that's still the question that stumps everyone. Well, what happened before the nothing?
Yeah.
And how did that nothing come from nothing? This is why math and science is so intriguing to me, especially the imaginary numbers in math and all this theoretical stuff, because this is the understanding. And math really is a branch off of theology. Everything started as theology, right? Basically.
Well, in many ways, yeah. I mean, I'm no great historian, right? But there is a thread, right? Because it's all talking about truth.
Yeah.
And how do we communicate that truth to each other? How do we understand it?
Yeah. And math is basically that universal language. Right?
Right.
That's the point.
Right.
Damn. All right. So last thing, because we've talked about why you got into the church, we've talked a little bit about forgiveness, how prayer can help us really tie into something bigger than ourselves, help motivate us, help accept even the worst of circumstances, and almost give up, forgive our or others, and almost forgive our perceptual desires for how we wish something would be. Mm-hmm. So the last thing I feel like would be really great to talk about is how all this could apply to what I talk about in my book with politics. And let's say someone, your neighbor, or could be really hard. I mean, we're in a church setting, so the abortion debate could be really hard. But what are some lessons that we could take to help bring about a feeling of community and shared relations with people who might be so fundamentally different, or we think are so fundamentally different than us, that we have this group split? You're this way, I'm this way. You're good, or I'm good, you're bad. What are, I guess, some teachings or some realizations that you've had that we can apply to helping bring about a more unified people? Because I guess that might not be the goal of religion at the end of the day, but having one unified world people. Right? Because it's chapter 11 in Genesis, when they were building the Tower of Babel, God looked down and said, man's under one language, they can do anything. Mm-hmm. To me, I'm no theologian, but to me that says something about we need to be together as a whole, as a complete human civilization. So how can we try to motivate people to see the similarities and to see the us instead of the differences and the thems? Yes,
and I do think that is a goal of religion. This that we are bound to each other. Pope Francis, in his document on creation, it's called Laudato Si, on caring for our common home, says over and over in that document, we are all connected. And at the core of Christianity, and I would say all the Abrahamic religions, this sense of being connected. Mm-hmm. I think even Buddhism would have that sense of being connected. Hinduism, there's this, in order to overcome the them and us mentality we have to continue to revisit and remind ourselves, because we automatically split ourselves apart. I'm not like him and she's not like me. But we have to recognize those connections, and that we celebrate unity in diversity. And they're not opposed to each other, right? And so that ability to say, I know that you have feelings and you have cares and you have concerns, and they may be different than mine, but that is what connects us.
Yes. And this is what I try to focus in on my book with. We're pattern recognizing animals. Every animal is. We create categories, labels, conceptions, stereotypes, generalize. But individuating, because we forget people are people and not just, or people aren't just part of a group, but are individuals. Someone who wakes up, throws up for their sheets, hits their alarm clock, brushes their teeth, who has feelings, who has a family. We tend to lose the individuality within the group, and it's an interesting thing of what makes us different is the thing we can all unify around, because it's something we all share. The ability to be different is across the board for everyone. Yeah.
And sometimes the desire to be different. Sometimes the desire to be the same, not to stand out, right? But other times the desire to, and the freedom to be different.
And so, clearly having the structured religion of this is our value, these are our deepest things, that in itself is huge for creating that assimilation of us. How could we see maybe, and one of my uncles was talking to me about this because he's also a priest. He said, my uncle's brother, he said, figure out how to solve the wars against the religions. And to me, it's like, man, why does there seem this huge division between the Abrahamic religions when at the core of it, they should all be, in a way, on the same side, in a way. So I guess it gets into a little more history, but why aren't the Jews, Muslims, and Christians all just kind of happy together?
Well, I think there's a lot of politics involved that often, and when I engage with, we're blessed in the Reno area because we do have dialogue with the Muslim and Jewish and Christian groups, and
I talk with Rajan Zed.
So Hindu, right? And so we for a little town, we do have the ability to interact well. And what it often comes down to when someone raises, and I think in the U.S., the Muslim population in the world is seen as most suspect because of the last 25 years or 30 years, right? And but often in engaging in conversation, say with an imam or someone from the Muslim faith, it's what you're seeing, USA, in the news and all that, are these who have been radicalized, and it's not part of the Quran, it's not part of our teaching. We talk about caring for each other and forgiving and all those same things, but it's used in an extreme, taken to an extreme way. And so I think that's a big part of it, and that people over the centuries have used religion for political gain.
Which to me gets into the idea, people say religion is always corrupted by man, but then I think, well, the practices are pretty cut and dry, great, across the board, great ideas how to behave, amazing teachings. But when I guess that's gets into why America chose the kind of government it did. Any system, any belief, if as soon as man gets involved, right, there's choice, there's good, there's bad, there's God and the devil. There's possibility for corruption, even in the most, fundamentally good institution. And so I guess that's a trick for every system, how to weed out the bad apples, the people who are, I guess, faking it to try to get what they want in a way. Who don't. I guess that's also a really interesting question. The people who might be these big, extremists in any major religion. Is there truth to any of what they're saying? Is there, like, are they just having an interpretation of their scriptures that really is just only suiting their pursuit for dominance, or is that maybe?
I think that's absolutely true.
Okay.
In many cases, right?
Yeah.
I think that the true, the person of true faith who's truly devoted to the tenets of the faith can't, by definition, become this extreme thing, and it becomes all about power.
Yeah.
For me, power for me. Even if I'm saying it in the name of my God, it's really about power over. It's one of the gifts, I think, in Christianity, and in the image of God on the cross is the sense of it isn't power over, it's power for. It's empowering. It's how do we share and care for each other in that way. And I think those extremes are just that.
Yeah.
And the reminder that humanity is sinful.
Yes.
This comes back to that beginning where it's that sense of there's a God and I'm not it. And I have to realize that, that we all have to strive together to make this work.
Yeah.
And when I become selfish and move into something that's going to benefit just me, then I'm moving away from what we believe.
And I guess this could get into an idea with extremists of any religion who might think the only way to bring about world peace or peace is to have every person in the world converted to my religion, which I guess what's in the you said. It's not the empowering for. It's how did you make this?
Not power over, but power for.
Yes.
So I like to use this image and this image, right? It's not about dominance. It's about recognizing the good and doing our best to ensure the common good.
Which I guess really makes me think of, again, why religion has been so, because people say religion's the worst thing that ever happened to humans. No, religion's probably one of the best things that happens to humans, because this idea of we're trying to weed out these people who just want to dominate. The whole idea is loving, forgiveness, community, working together, right? It's
how do we do that, right?
Yeah, the whole idea is about cooperation with people who are diverse and the most othered, but still seeing them as one family of God, right? In a way.
That's exactly.
Man.
But I think people come to conclusions because over the many centuries, in the name of religion, a lot of awful things have happened. And are done. And today is still true. And so it's that sense of we have to constantly be purifying. All right, if I'm doing this in the name of Jesus Christ, where do I find that in the teachings and understanding of Jesus Christ?
Because and this gets, because we'll try to wrap it up soon. I don't really know where we're at with it, but this idea of we forget, and this is the heart of my book, we know what to do. Everyone has an idea that this is how we should behave in a good society. Yet we forget. Someone cuts us off, we pull out our gun and I'm threaten. We forget all of these basic key elements that we've been told as a kid to do.
Yeah.
We just forget. And so what's the best way that we can remind ourselves? We forget. Is it having something on our phone we can look at? I guess maybe wearing the cross is actually one of the best things.
Yeah, as long as it's not just a piece of jewelry, right? I mean, it has to be. I think one of the most important things is to be sure that I am taking time daily to be centered in the presence of God and recognizing, as you mentioned earlier, this sense of God is with us. that I'm centered in that presence. And when I react in anger or in a hurtful manner or whatever, I've lost that centeredness. Now, having said that, I still do all those things. I still get angry. I still say things that hurt people. Yeah. But if I'm centered, I'm less likely to do that. And I more easily name it when I do that. And so I think being reflective people and being people-centered in these ideas that we've talked about, whatever a person's faith background is. Yeah. I've known some very faithful, in the sense of respecting humanity and creation, atheists, and they have a sense of a higher calling outside of themselves. They wouldn't call it God, but they would call it this duty to be in union with other people and caring for what's in front of us.
Which makes me think if it's either some, I don't know, that's being good, right? Because we think are people naturally bad and they have to be conditioned to be good, or are people good and conditioned to be bad? Well, it's kind of both. But for the last couple 100,000 years, I think being good has actually been selected. Most people reflexively are good. We can think of the rule of reciprocity. Someone does something good to you, 9 times out of 10, you're going to do something good back. I mean, it's the sales tactics people will use, but for the most part, if people aren't just trying to use these tricks of, humanity's good, just for their favor, to dominate, to be, deceitful, we honestly are getting pretty set up to be very cooperative, loving, community-driven people, right? So it's...
for sure. And I think that you're touching on the golden rule, right? And I remember years ago we had a picnic gathering up at UNR when I was at the parish up at university, and it was an interfaith gathering, and we wanted to pick something that we could all kind of share on at our tables. We asked people to sit with mixed tables, and that's what we used was do to others what you would have them do to you. And we had a very similar context from the Quran. We had something from the Jewish scriptures, which is don't do to others what you would not want them to do to you. Right?
Yes.
And so, but it came down to this same stream, and I think we had 5 or 6 or 7 major religions all had that same concept as a part of their teaching.
And I guess this is, and this is what I talk about in my book. Most people are kind of on the same page. Most people have these traits of cooperation and loving and caring and empathy, and it really is just these extremes, these almost pathological, these people with pathological behavioral patterns.
And I think often they're acting out of their own pain. That's either not been named or has been named and made worse.
Because this is the idea with learned hopelessness. Your behavior gets selected. I know there's talk about free will, but in my case, behavior gets selected. Well, if you're trying everything and nothing works, well, if you keep trying, eventually you might do the thing that's horrible, but gets reinforced. Like, whatever kind of tragedy, whatever kind of hateful, what's the word for just hating humanity? Misanthropic. Right? Yeah. So, man, I think we're getting to a good point where we could wrap it up. Do you have any last final words or a sentence to end on?
Well, I mean, other than I guess I would just encourage all of us and those who are watching this as well that we become mindful, right? We become, but not just mindful. I like to say becoming heartful at the same time, because mind can be all up here, right? And it can be we can disassociate, but that we're called to live together. We're given each other as gift, not as enemy, and that if we can do our best to, whatever our religious pattern and practice and tradition has been, that we can take that and recognize that call to mutual respect and love, and thereby bring good into the world as opposed to harm or hatred.
Bam. Thank you. This was great.
Pleasure.